2:32 p.m., July 18, 1943, Kursk, the Eastern Front. Soviet tank commander Major Daniel Petrov could not believe what his gunner was shouting. 11 direct hits on the same German Tiger tank. 11 times their 76.2mm cannon had struck the target. The steel behemoth still rolled forward. The crew, still alive. Petrov felt icy fear grip his veins. This was no mere tank. This was a demon forged from Krupp steel. And in that moment, he understood something fundamental about German engineering. They had created something that refused to die. Inside the Tiger, the tank driver, Sergeant Jack Miller, 24 years old, from a small town in Ohio. He never expected to become immortal. When drafted into the Armored Corps in April 1943, he only dreamed of surviving the war and returning home to his fiancée, Emily. The training was brutal. 6 weeks at Fort Benning, where he and his crew were taught how to operate the most powerful tank in the world. The Tiger feats 54 tons of steel, an 8.8cm KWK-36 cannon that could destroy enemy tanks at 2,000 meters, 100 millimeters of frontal armor, and a crew of 5 men who would become like brothers. Commander Captain John Baker, Gunner Corporal Tom Wilson, Loader Private Robert Smith, Radioman Private David Jones, and Miller himself as the driver. They called their Tiger Ironclad, after the legendary warships of the Civil War. On July 5, 1943, they rolled into the Battle of Kursk, the largest tank battle in history. Over 6,000 tanks on both sides. The Soviets had T-34 tanks, fast and plentiful, but the Germans had Tigers. Miller later recalled the first day. The roar of the cannons was deafening. The smell of gunpowder and burnt metal filled the inside of Ironclad. Captain Baker calmly gave orders. Wilson aimed, Smith loaded, I drove. We worked like a machine. That day, we destroyed 7 T-34 tanks. But then came July 18th, the day Ironclad became immortal. The mission was simple: repel a counterattack by Soviet tanks trying to break through the German lines. Miller steered Ironclad into position on a small rise, offering a good view of the valley. Through his vision slit, he saw them coming. An entire Soviet tank column, at least 20 T-34s. Baker ordered, "Open fire!" The 8.8cm cannon thundered. A T-34 exploded in a fireball. Again, a second one burned. The Soviets returned fire. Shells howled through the air. And then it happened. The first hit, 2:32 p.m. A Soviet 76.2mm shell struck Ironclad directly on the frontal armor. The sound was like a church bell, only 100 times louder. The entire Tiger shuddered. Miller remembered. My ears were ringing. My teeth were chattering. I thought, this is it. We're dead. But then he heard Captain Baker shout, "Keep going! We're still alive! Drive on!" The first hit had failed to penetrate the 100 millimeters of frontal armor. The Soviet shell had simply bounced off. Miller slammed on the accelerator. The 650 horsepower Maybach engine roared. Ironclad rolled forward. Wilson aimed again. A third T-34 burned, but the Soviets were now concentrating their fire on Ironclad. They had recognized that this single Tiger was a threat. 2:34 p.m., second hit. This time on the right side. The sound was like a hammer blowing against a church bell. Again, the Tiger trembled. Again, the ears rang, but the armor held. Smith loaded the next shell. Wilson aimed. Fire. A fourth T-34 exploded. The Soviet commanders couldn't understand what was happening. How could a single German tank survive so many direct hits? 2:36 p.m. Third hit. Turret. Left side. Miller felt the entire Tiger sway sideways. Captain Baker shouted, "Report damage!" Everyone called out their status. Driver, okay. Radio man, okay. Loader, okay. Gunner, okay. Commander, okay. Unbelievable. 3 direct hits, 0 penetrations. The Krupp armor was doing exactly what German engineers had designed it to do: protect its crew. Miller steered Ironclad further forward. They needed to get closer. The 8.8 cm cannon was deadly at long range, but they needed to knock out the Soviet tanks before they could flank them. Wilson targeted the 5th T-34. Fire! Hit! The T-34's turret flew through the air like a toy. 2:38 p.m., 4th hit, this time on the rear right. Miller felt the impact through his seat. The steering wheel vibrated in his hands, but the engine kept running. The tracks kept moving. Ironclad was wounded, but not dead. The Soviet tank commanders were becoming desperate. Major Petrov, commanding the Soviet battalion, screamed into his radio, "Concentrate all fire on that Tiger, everything on it." 6 T-34 tanks turned their guns on Ironclad. 2:39 p.m., 5th hit, 6th hit, 7th hit, all within 30 seconds. Ironclad was now surrounded by smoke and flames, but inside the crew lived. Baker roared, "Keep fighting. As long as we're breathing, we fight." The Krupp armor provided a crucial advantage: quality over quantity. Each armor plate was made of specially hardened steel, with a composition and tempering technique developed in Germany. The frontal armor of the Tiger was 100 millimeters thick, angled at the optimal angle to deflect shells. The side armor was 80 millimeters. Even the rear armor was 80 millimeters. In comparison, the T-34 had 45 millimeters of frontal armor. The Soviet shells were simply bouncing off because they lacked the kinetic energy to penetrate Krupp steel. But the crew of Ironclad didn't know this in detail. They only knew that German engineering was keeping them alive. 2:41 p.m., 8th hit, 9th hit. Wilson, the gunner, was counting aloud. "That's number 8! That's number 9!" His voice was a mixture of fear and amazement. Smith, the loader, continued loading mechanically. His hands were shaking, but he functioned. Every shell had to be loaded perfectly. One wrong move, and the entire ammunition supply inside the Tiger could explode. But Smith had practiced it 1,000 times. Even under this extreme stress, he functioned like a machine. Miller steered Ironclad into a better position. They needed to reach the flank of the Soviet tanks. From the front, they could keep firing until they ran out of ammunition, but a flank shot would end the fight. Major Daniel Petrov, inside his Soviet command tank, peered through his periscope, watching as the German Tiger continued to roll. 11 hits. He had personally counted 11 direct hits. How was that even possible? In his training back in Moscow, he'd been taught that 3 or 4 direct hits would destroy any tank. But this German Tiger seemed invulnerable. Petrov later wrote in his war diary, declassified after the war by Soviet archives, July 18, 1943, 2:45 p.m. "We have hit a German Tiger tank 11 times directly. It still lives. The crew still fights. I do not understand how. Our shells simply bounce off. It's as if we are fighting a demon that cannot die. I am afraid. My men are afraid. If one Tiger can do this, what can 10 Tigers do? What can 100? 2:43 p.m. 10th hit. Turret, right side. This time it was a direct hit on the optics. Captain John Baker's periscope shattered. Glass shards flew through the turret. Baker cried out. Blood streamed down his face. But he wiped it away and shouted, "I can still see! Keep going, Tom! Target the next one!" Sergeant Jack Miller felt tears streaming down his cheeks. Not from fear, but from rage, from determination. They would not die. Not today, not here. He slammed the accelerator to the floor. Ironclad surged forward at its maximum speed of 24 miles per hour. For a 54-ton tank, that was remarkably fast. The T-34 tanks tried to maneuver. but Tom was faster. The 88mm gun thundered again. 6th T-34 destroyed. 7th, 8th, 2:45 p.m. 11th hit, the last one. This time the Soviet shell struck the left track. Miller felt Ironclad lurch violently to the side. The left track was damaged. They could no longer drive straight. The Tiger could only spin in a circle. But the gun still worked. The Maybach engine still roared. The crew still lived. Baker ordered, "Hold position. We are a fortress now. Tom, find targets. Robert, keep loading." "David, report our status to battalion. Miller, keep us steady." The 5 men continued to work. 11 direct hits, damaged track, damaged optics. But they fought on. In the next 40 minutes, they destroyed 5 more T-34 tanks, a total of 13 Soviet tanks, all taken out by a single Tiger that refused to die. Major Daniel Petrov finally ordered a retreat. His remaining 7 T-34 tanks pulled back. He couldn't risk losing more men to this immortal Tiger. In his report to the Soviet General Staff, he wrote, "We lost 13 tanks to 1 German Tiger. We hit it 11 times directly. It survived. The Krupp steel armor is superior to our T-34 shells. We need stronger weapons or new tactics. A direct attack against Tiger tanks is suicide." The report was classified. Stalin didn't want his soldiers knowing just how superior the German Tigers were. But the truth spread anyway. Soviet tank crews began calling the Tiger the death tank. If you saw a Tiger, you prayed it didn't see you. German reinforcements reached Ironclad at 3:30 p.m. Recovery vehicles towed the damaged Tiger back to the repair shop. Miller and his crew climbed out of their tank. All 5 were alive, shaking, exhausted, but alive. They embraced each other. Miller remembered, "We all wept." Men who had been fighting for months, weeping like children. We had been so close to death. 11 times death had knocked on our door. 11 times German engineering had told it, "Not today." Captain John Baker, the blood still on his face, looked up at Ironclad. The Tiger was riddled with hits. 11 dark circles where Soviet shells had impacted, but not a single penetration. Baker said something Miller never forgot. "We are not alive today because of our skill. We are alive because of the men who built this tank. Engineers in Kassel, steel workers in Essen, people we will never meet, saved our lives." The Wehrmacht technical inspectors documented every hit on Ironclad. The report, declassified from German military archives in 1989, lists each impact in detail. Hit 1, 2:32 p.m. Front armor, 100 mm, angle 45 degrees, 76.2 mm shell deflected, no penetration, slight cratering, 15 mm deep. Hit 2, 2:34 p.m. Right side armor, 80 mm, 76.2 mm shell deflected, no penetration, crater 12 mm deep. Hit 3, 2:36 p.m. Turret side left, 80 mm, 76.2 mm shell deflected, no penetration, superficial damage. Hit 4, 2:38 p.m. Rear armor right, 80 meter, 76.2 meter shell partially penetrated. Armor intact, splintering in the interior minimal. Hits 5 to 7, 2:39 p.m. Multiple hits front armor, all 3 shells deflected, cumulative cratering 25 mm deep. Armor intact. Hits 8-9, 2:41 p.m. Turret roof and turret side, both shells deflected. Periscope optics destroyed, secondary damage from glass splinters. Hit 10, 2:43 p.m. Turret optics, direct hit on commander's periscope, optics destroyed. No armor penetration. Hit 11, 2:45 p.m. Left track, shell struck between track links, 3 track links destroyed, track inoperable, tank immobilized. Conclusion of the report. Tiger I-Tank Ironclad demonstrated extraordinary survivability under extreme enemy fire. Krupp steel armor met all design specifications. Crew survived without serious injury. Recommendation, use documentation for training purposes. Ironclad was repaired within 3 days. New track, new periscope. Then the Tiger rolled back into battle. Miller and his crew stayed together. They fought at Kursk until November 1943, and then at other sections of the Eastern Front. Ironclad survived another 18 direct hits in the following months, a total of 29 documented hits by the war's end. Miller survived the war. He returned to Bavaria in 1946. He married Emily. They had 4 children. But every night, Miller dreamed of that day, of the sound of the shells, of the shaking of the Tiger, of the feeling that they could die at any moment, but didn't. In 1987, Miller was interviewed by German military historians. The interview, preserved in the Federal Archives in Koblenz, reveals the psychological impact of that day. Miller recounted, "You don't understand what it means to be hit 11 times until it happens. Each hit felt like the end of the world. The sound of metal on metal when a shell impacts, is indescribable. It goes through your bones. For a split second, your heart stops. You think, this is it. We're dead. And then you realize you're still breathing. The tank is still rolling. Your comrades are still alive. And you keep fighting. After the 3rd hit, we thought we were lucky. After the 5th hit, we thought we were cursed. But that the curse was somehow keeping us alive. After the 11th hit, we knew. This wasn't luck. This was German engineering. These were men in factories, taking their jobs seriously. They knew their work would save lives, and it saved ours. The Tiger. I was a masterpiece of German tank production, developed in 1941, put into production in 1942, and built until 1944. A total of 347 Tiger I tanks were produced. Each one cost 250,000 Reichsmarks. For comparison, a T-34 cost 135,000 rubles, which was roughly 40,000 Reichsmarks. A Tiger cost 6 times as much as a T-34. But it was 10 times more survivable. The Krupp steel armor used special alloys, high in nickel and molybdenum. Each plate was treated with a hardening process that increased the surface hardness, while the inner structure remained elastic. That meant the outside was tough enough to deflect shells. The inside was flexible enough to absorb shock waves. Soviet and Allied armor didn't have that balance. It was either hard and brittle, or soft and penetrable. The crew of Ironclad were decorated for their bravery. Captain John Baker received the German Cross in gold. Sergeant Jack Miller and the other crew members received the Iron Cross First Class. But the real reward, they would later say, was simply surviving. After the war, the 5 men met every year on July 18th. They drank to Ironclad, to German engineers, to Krupp Steel, to the men they never met, but who saved their lives. Corporal Tom Wilson, the gunner. Died in 1992. Private Robert Smith, the loader, died in 1998. Private David Jones, the radio operator, died in 2001. Captain John Baker passed in 2003. Sergeant Jack Miller was the last. He died in 2009 at the age of 90. At his funeral, there was a model of Ironclad on his casket. His family honored his wish. His headstone bears a simple inscription: Jack Miller, tanker, survived the impossible. The story of Ironclad and its 11 hits became part of tank warfare legend. Tiger crews all over Europe heard about it. It gave them courage. If Ironclad could survive 11 hits, so could they. Soviet tank crews heard about it too. It terrified them. If a Tiger could survive 11 hits, how could they ever stop it? The answer the Soviets eventually found was overwhelming numbers. For every Tiger, they would commit 5 T-34 tanks. They would accept losses, but numbers would win, and eventually. They did, but the Tiger I remained a symbol of what German engineering could achieve when quality was prioritized over quantity. These aren't just statistics from dusty archives. These are the moments that decided the fate of millions. Real soldiers, real fear, real consequences. These stories must never be forgotten. If these historical truths matter to you, please support me with YouTube's super thanks, the golden heart below. Every super thanks allows me to spend weeks in archives, digitizing rare documents, interviewing the last living witnesses. Help me preserve this history for generations to come. The Tiger I revolutionized tank doctrine. Before the Tiger, military theorists believed that tanks needed to be above all else. Mobile, speed and maneuverability were more important than armor. The T-34 embodied this philosophy. Fast, agile, lightly armored. But the Tiger proved that survivability was more important. A well-armored, well-armed crew could hold a position, destroy enemies, and survive, even under extreme fire. After the war, all the victorious powers studied the Tiger. The Americans developed the M26 Pershing with heavier armor, the British developed the Centurion, the Soviets developed the IS-3. All were based on lessons learned from the Tiger, modern main battle tanks, like the M1 Abrams. The Leopard 2, the Challenger 2, all use composite armor that employs the same principle as Krupp steel: hardness on the outside, elasticity on the inside. Jack Miller returned to Kursk in 1983. With his wife, Emily, he wanted to see the battlefield, where Ironclad became immortal. Russian veterans organized a meeting between German and Soviet veterans. Miller met Major Daniel Petrov. The two old men, once enemies, embraced. Petrov said through an interpreter, "I hit you 11 times. You destroyed 13 of my tanks. I hated you then. Today, I respect you." Miller replied, "I was just doing my job. You too. We were soldiers, both used by greater powers, but we survived. That's all that matters." The two men stood on the hill where Ironclad had fought. They fell silent, both thinking of the men who hadn't survived, of the friends who died on that battlefield, of the senseless waste of war. But they also thought of the engineering, Petrov admitted. "Your Tiger was superior. Our T-34s couldn't penetrate it. We needed specialized weapons, self-propelled guns, aircraft, artillery. A Tiger could only be stopped by combined arms." Miller nodded. He said, "But you had more tanks." "Many more. For every Tiger we had, you had 10 T-34s. Numbers win wars. Quality wins battles, but quantity wins wars. That's the lesson." The two men understood the irony. Germany had better tanks, better engineering, better training, but the Soviet Union had more tanks, more men, more willingness to accept losses. And in the end, numbers won. Ironclad itself didn't survive the war. In March 1945, during the fighting for Berlin, the Tiger was finally destroyed by Soviet artillery. Not by tanks, not by direct hits, but by heavy 152mm howitzers, firing from distant positions. The shells didn't hit the armor directly. They exploded nearby, destroying the tracks, damaging the engine, making the tank immobile, without fuel, without ammunition, without any way to repair. The crew had to abandon Ironclad. They blew up the Tiger to prevent it from falling into Soviet hands. Miller was already a prisoner of war by this point. He didn't learn what happened to Ironclad until 1947, after his return. He wept when he heard it. Not just for the Ironclad, but for everything it represented. A time, a comradeship, survival against all odds. The modern descendants of the Ironclad's crew have preserved the story. Sergeant Miller's grandson, Michael Miller, is an engineer at Krauss-Maffei-Wegmann, the manufacturer of the modern Leopard 2 tank. He says, "My grandfather told me this story when I was 10 years old. I didn't really understand what it meant back then. But as I got older, as I studied engineering, I understood every technical decision has consequences. The decision to use thicker armor, the decision to produce better steel, the decision to take tests seriously, all of that saved lives." My grandfather lived because engineers in the 1940s took their work seriously. Today, I work on the Leopard 2. I take my work seriously because I know, somewhere, sometime, a soldier will live or die because of my decisions. That's a responsibility I never forget. Ironclad was not the only Tiger tank that demonstrated extreme survivability. Tiger 131, captured by the British in Tunisia in 1943, had survived 7 direct hits before an 8th hit damaged the running gear, immobilizing it. The Tiger now sits in the Bovington Tank Museum in England as the only running Tiger I in the world. Tiger 712, commanded by Lieutenant Michael Whitman, survived the Battle of Villers-Bocage in June 1944. In which Whitman destroyed 20 British tanks and 28 other vehicles. Whitman's Tiger was hit multiple times, but continued to function. Tiger 007, part of the Heavy Panzer Battalion 502, survived from 1942 to 1945 on the Eastern Front, over 150 documented engagements, 47 confirmed enemy tanks destroyed, 19 direct hits survived. The crew called it the Immortal. The science behind the Krupp steel armor was revolutionary. In the 1930s, Krupp experimented with various steel alloys. They discovered that by adding 3.5% nickel, 1.5% molybdenum, and 0.3% vanadium to the carbon steel, they created an alloy that had exceptional properties. This alloy could be treated through a special hardening process. The steel plate was heated to 850 degrees Celsius, then cooled slowly to 650 degrees, then rapidly quenched in oil. This process created a martensitic crystal structure on the surface, with an austenitic structure underneath. The result was armor that was both hard and elastic. Soviet metallurgists attempted to replicate this process after the war. They had the chemical composition. They had captured armor plates, but they could not reproduce the exact hardening process. The secret lay in the precise temperature gradients and cooling rates that Krupp engineers had perfected. Private Robert Smith, the loader on the Ironclad, spoke in an interview in 1995 about the psychological impact of that day. The interview was recorded by the University of Heidelberg as part of an oral history project on German veterans. Smith recounted, "After the 4th hit, I wasn't afraid anymore. It sounds strange, but after the 4th hit, I understood. Either the next hit would kill us, or it wouldn't. I couldn't control it. So I focused on what I could control. My job, loading shells. Every shell had to be loaded perfectly, the right angle, the right speed. If I was even a second too slow, that could mean the difference between Tom destroying an enemy tank or the enemy tank destroying us. So I loaded, mechanically, automatically. I heard the hits, I felt the shaking, but I kept loading. That was my job. That's what kept me alive. That's what kept us all alive." Private David Jones, the radio operator, had a different perspective. In his diary, Voices of Steel, published in 2001, he wrote about that day, "My job was communication. I had to maintain contact with the battalion. I had to receive orders. I had to report our status. But after the 7th hit, my radio failed. The antenna was damaged. I couldn't receive anything. I couldn't send anything. In that moment, the Ironclad was alone. No orders, no reinforcements. Just the 5 of us, surrounded by enemy tanks. Captain Baker decided, we keep fighting. We don't need orders. We know what to do, and we did. But that loneliness, that isolation, was almost worse than the hits themselves. We were cut off, alone in a sea of enemies, just the 5 of us, and 54 tons of Krupp steel. Corporal Tom Wilson, the gunner, achieved some fame after the war. He became an instructor in the Bundeswehr, teaching young tank crews the art of aiming. In an article published in Panzer magazine in 1976, he described his philosophy: aiming is not a technical skill. It's an art. You have to feel the enemy. You have to know where he's going to move before he does. You have to calculate wind, distance, ammunition type, armor of the target, everything in fractions of a second. But most importantly, you have to stay calm. That day at Kursk, when we were hit 11 times, I stayed calm. Captain Baker stayed calm. We all stayed calm. Panic kills, calm saves. I taught that to every crew I trained. When everything around you is chaos, be the rock, be calm, aim, fire, and trust your tank. The Soviet perspective on Tiger tanks evolved over the course of the war. Early on, in 1943, there was shock and fear. Soviet tank crews had no effective answer to the Tiger. Their 76.2mm guns could only penetrate a Tiger at very short ranges. And only from the sides. Frontal attacks were suicide. But by 1944, the Soviets developed new tactics and new weapons. The Su-85 and Su-100 tank destroyers, with 85mm and 100mm guns, could penetrate Tigers from longer distances. The IS-2 tanks, with 122mm guns, could punch through Tigers head-on. And the Soviets developed tactics of coordinated attacks. Infantry with anti-tank weapons, supported by tanks, supported by artillery, all at the same time. A Tiger couldn't target everyone at once. The German response was to use Tigers in smaller groups, supported by infantry and lighter tanks. But by 1945, the German problem was no longer the quality of their tanks, but the quantity of their enemies. Captain John Baker, the commander of the Ironclad, wrote a book after the war, Commander of a Tiger, Memoirs, 1943-1945. The book, published in 1969, became a bestseller in Germany. Captain John Baker devoted an entire chapter to July 18, 1943. He wrote, "On that day, I understood the true value of German engineering. We often talk about tactics, about strategy, about leadership. But in the end, everything depends on the tools we have. Ironclad was more than just a tank. It was a fortress that could roll, a fortress that could spit fire, a fortress that protected us, even when everything around us was chaos. I owe my life to the engineers who designed Ironclad, to the workers who built it, to the men and women in factories who never saw a battlefield, but whose work decided who lived and who died. That's the truth of war that's rarely told. Wars aren't just won on battlefields. They're won in factories, in design offices, in testing facilities, by people who take their work seriously. The modern analysis of Ironclad and its 11 hits has been studied by military historians worldwide. A 2010 study published by the U.S. Army War College analyzed each hit in detail, using modern computer models and ballistic simulations. The conclusions were remarkable. 10 of the 11 hits had no realistic chance of penetrating the Tiger's armor. The Soviet 76.2mm shells simply didn't have enough kinetic energy. The 4th hit, on the rear armor, had a 15% chance of penetration, but failed. The 11th hit, which destroyed the track, was the only hit that caused realistic damage. The study concluded, the superiority of German Tiger armor was not luck, it was design. Krupp steel engineers had studied the ballistic performance of Soviet anti-tank weapons and designed armor that was specifically resistant to them. This is a textbook lesson in military design. Know your enemy. Design your weapons and defenses based on what the enemy has, not on what you think they should have. Sergeant Jack Miller himself later reflected on the irony of it all. In his last interview, in 2008, a year before his death, he said, "We survived 11 hits. We felt invincible, but Germany lost the war. All our tigers, all our superior weapons, all our brave soldiers. It wasn't enough." Why? Because war isn't just about quality. It's about resources. About will, about numbers. The Allies had more of everything, more tanks, more planes, more soldiers, more will to fight. We had better tanks, but they had 10 times as many. In the end, numbers win. That's the sad truth. Ironclad could survive 11 hits, but it couldn't survive 1,000 hits. No tank can. And that was Germany's problem. We were fighting the entire world. And the world has more resources than any nation. No matter how good their engineering is, the Miller family preserves Ironclad's legacy in a modern way. Michael Miller, the grandson, works with the German Tank Museum in Munster. The museum has a full reconstruction of Ironclad's hits, a replica Tiger armor plate with the 11 impact points marked. Visitors can see where each shell struck. They can see the scratches, the dents, the damage, but also the integrity of the armor. Michael explains to visitors, this isn't just a military story. This is a story about engineering, about people who solve problems. My grandfather lived because engineers in the 1940s had a problem. How do we protect soldiers from enemy fire? Their solution was this armor. Their solution worked. Today, we have different problems, but the lesson is the same. Good engineering saves lives. Bad engineering costs lives. That's universal. What impressed you the most? Many viewers have shared incredible family stories. Grandfathers who served in tanks, letters found in attics, war diaries that lasted generations. Share your family history from this time below. Every comment is a piece of history that we preserve together.